republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone who is here with us this evening, and to those of you watching at home. If you are here and you'd like to address the board at any time, I just ask that you be recognized by the president and that you make your comments from the podium so that the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. You're welcome to speak now, or you're also welcome to wait until a particular agenda item comes up if you would like to address that issue at that time. Would anyone like to address the board at this point? Hearing none, we'll move on to reports of village officers. I apologize for my voice tonight. I'm like week 2 of a bad chest cold. My first item tonight is a very sad one. Many of you probably are aware that we lost one of Riverside's greatest friends and residents and servants. Donald Farnham passed away. The Landmark had a wonderful tribute to him, and I commend it to everyone to read it, to learn more about his amazing life and his amazing accomplishments. But one of the things that the Landmark really focused on that I just wanted to reiterate here is how important Don Farnham was to the life of this village. It was Don Farnham and Dr. Bob Novak who really were the driving forces behind Riverside TV. And Riverside TV has developed into probably the most powerful tool that we have to ensure transparency in our government. And that is a direct tribute to the work that Don Farnham did for many, many years and the many, many young men and women that he mentored in that regard. I did want to share one thing with you that I thought says it better than I ever could say. This was a Facebook post from Nora Farnham. She was traveling. She was actually on the other side of the world when her father passed away. And this is what she had to say. My heart is broken, but reading the many comments on Pop's page has been comforting. Some of the words used there to describe him include wonderful role model, kind, generous, one of a kind, special, a great spirit, a wise man, legend, patriot, gentleman, amazing, inspiring, funny, remarkable, gracious, compassionate, strong, always smiling, hero, loving, class act, honorable, treated everyone with respect. The list goes on. He was all of these and more. He was generous with his time, his friendship, and his love. He maintained friendships from decades ago and continued to make new friends everywhere he went. He told me he loved me every single day. He was also hilarious and kept us laughing with his pranks, jokes, and far-side humor. I was with him in September when he received his diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I started to cry, and right away he said, "No long faces. We're going to keep the party going." That's just how he was. He faced that cancer the same way I imagine he faced the Battle of Iwo Jima as a young Marine. Bravely, matter-of-factly, and hopeful his family wouldn't worry. The world would be a better place if everyone took a page out of Pop's book. We could honor his legacy by treating each other with the kindness and respect, being open and friendly to new faces, taking care of each other, and playing practical jokes on each other. And by all means, let's keep the party going. Thank you, Nora, and rest in peace, Donald Farnham. He was a truly great man. The next thing I wanted to share with you this evening is some good news. Some of you might have been following over the last couple of years. There has been a group of 20 dedicated volunteers who in the springtime have been going out tracking migratory birds through our village. The village of Riverside sits on the Mississippi Flyway, which is the migratory route for birds coming from Central and South America to their breeding grounds in Canada. So a couple years ago, a group of us led by Jill Mateo, Melinda Pruitt-Jones, and Steve Pruitt-Jones joined together to try to get the village of Riverside designated an important bird area by the Audubon Society. The important bird area concept originated in Europe with BirdLife, and it was picked up by Audubon Society in the 80s and then later here in Illinois in the 90s. And it's a major effort to conserve the important areas for migratory birds throughout the world. So after 2 years of many hours of data gathering, I'm pleased to announce that the Audubon Society has granted that designation to the Village of Riverside as an important bird area. We are the 92nd such area to be designated in the state of Illinois. So I want to congratulate the team that led it and also the many volunteers that helped us to accomplish this task. It's yet another example of the efforts that Riverside is making to emphasize the importance of our natural areas and our natural beauty and our responsibility to those areas as their eternal stewards. So congratulations to everyone. And that is all I have. Manager Francis.
I do not have a report this evening.
Moving on then to the approval of the consent agenda. On the agenda this evening, approve the voucher list of bills for February 20th, 2020. Approve the Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes for February 6, 2020. Review and file the following: the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners meeting minutes December 12, 2019, the Garage and Driveways Ad Hoc Committee meeting minutes of November 13, 2019, and February 5th, 2020, the Landscape Advisory Commission meeting minutes of January 14, 2020, Preservation Commission meeting minutes of October 10, 2019, the regular meeting, the November 14, 2019 special meeting, and January 14, 2020 special meeting. The Fire Department and Police Department January 20 monthly reports. Also on the agenda, an ordinance amending Section 810.6 of Chapter 10, Construction of Utility Facilities and Public Right-of-Ways, in Title 8, Public Ways and Property of the Village Code relative to utility permits. Are there any items that anyone needs removed for discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
By Mr. Gallegos.
Second.
By Ms. Evans. Please call the roll.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Jisa.
Aye.
Trustee Hannon.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up are reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Are there any liaison reports? Hearing none, we'll move on to a presentation by Chief Weitzel, who's going to provide an update on the status of state funding for police training and education. Chief Weitzel.
Good evening, Mr. President, trustees, and Manager Francis. I just wanted to update the board on a critical training issue that's taking place in Illinois right now. So I serve on the Illinois Chiefs Legislative Committee, and we've been meeting over the last several months. And a lot of our meetings have been dedicated to the fact that the Illinois Training and Standards Board for Law Enforcement has ceased to receive the funding in the tune of $5 million from what's called the traffic surcharge money for the traffic tickets in Illinois. And they are in desperate need of funding. They've already started to cancel our training. So just for example, I printed out, the State Training Board puts out a calendar of the training that each municipality receives. So Riverside, every year when we budget for what's called Northeast Multi-Regional Training, which is a mobile training unit, part of the greater Illinois Training Board. And we have 16 classes for our officers throughout the year, and 8 of them have already been canceled. And some of those are state-mandated training, such as the proper use of Narcan or naloxone. By law, we have to train every 3 years on that. Investigation of sexual assault and abuse, that's a mandate, it's been canceled. Investigator School for New Detectives has been canceled. Lead Homicide Investigator School has been canceled. What that is the state requires, we just can't put an officer in the Detective Bureau. When we put an officer in detectives, he must be state certified as what's called a lead homicide investigator, and he must be certified as an investigator. They have to go to a separate school within 6 months of being assigned to that assignment. And we have to send those certifications to the state training board that our officers have been trained and they've been certified. In our case, we also certify that with our insurance company, IRMA. We send them those files. So in case there was litigation, they would know that our officers had the state mandated training. And that's just a few of the training that has been canceled. There's 11 new mandates that were put on law enforcement with the Criminal Justice Reform Act that passed over the last several years. And those mandated trainings have no funding. And we're required to do that. So my officers will have to attend that. And the Village of Riverside will have to pick up those costs, which are not budgeted, going forward if the funding doesn't happen. Currently, we pay $95 a year for officer training through NEMRT. It's based on the size of the department. We fall under 20 and under. They're projecting raising ours to $140 per officer if we don't receive the surcharge money. And there's been some controversy about the surcharge money. We don't like it. When the bill was passed in Springfield by the legislators, we never wanted, the law enforcement wanted $5 million allocated in a line item budget from the general budget for the state of Illinois. When the law was passed in Springfield, the legislators put the $5 or $10 surcharge on the conviction of traffic citations. It was not a police initiative. So those that think that we shouldn't be getting money from the citations, we don't have a problem with that. It just needs to be funded, but currently that's the only funding the agency receives. They receive no other funding for training except for the traffic surcharge money. So unless there is some funding put there, probably by the end of May, a lot of this funding will cease. And that includes the police academy. Currently it's $6,000 to send an officer to the police academy. They do reimburse one half of that. They've stopped reimbursing that completely. They've already sent an email out that that's stopped. So this could really spin out of control because it's not that I can't send my officers. I'll have to come back into the village manager's office in the future and say we would have to appear in front of the board for a budget amendment because that's not budgeted in my budget. We budgeted what we paid in NEMRT so the officers can attend the training. So there is a bill that was introduced within the last week. If you, those that follow Springfield, you had to file your bills by the 14th. And a lot of legislators that just want to get their bill in, they file shell bills. So they file a bill number, and there's very little data in there, but they hold it so they can add language to it. So Senate Bill 3739 has been introduced to fund $5 million for law enforcement this year. It was just introduced within the last 10 days. It's a Senate bill. It's Senate Bill 3739. So the Illinois Chiefs are making this our number one priority because it's statewide. It affects every single police agency in the state, regardless of the size or how many officers you have. So one of the reasons I appeared in front of the board today was at our last legislative meeting we held in Oak Brook. We wanted to make sure that the chiefs that were there, that we talked to our boards, especially our boards that have presidents or board members that are active in Springfield or have ties to legislators, that they could support this bill going forward, because it's really all we have. And if there's some other mechanism that needs to be used in the future besides surcharge money from tickets, we're all for that. That we're not hooking our wagon to that horse. It's just that that's the way the bill was written in Springfield over 10 years ago.
Who made the decision to curtail the funding?
So what happened is so when they did the Criminal Justice Reform Act, they took that out of it. It probably was not intended to be taken out of that. But when they did some of the new state laws, when they did this package for criminal justice, the surcharge money was taken out, and that was taken out by legislators that felt that maybe there was too much of that money was coming from urban areas and not from rural areas, that a lot of citations were being issued in the metro Chicago area versus central Illinois and southern Illinois. So they took that out, thinking that maybe people who would not be able to pay traffic tickets shouldn't be getting a surcharge on there too, that it would be disproportionate. So it probably wasn't meant that way, but that's what happened when they took that piece of legislation was passed and they took that part out. There is really, and judges are allowed to waive fees that's the thing. In Cook County, if you were fined $180 for a speeding ticket and the court said you have $100 in fees, a judge can waive fees. He can't waive the fine. So a lot of times when a defendant appears in front of you and they say it's $240 when you add in the fees, because one of the bad things about the fees in Illinois is everybody adds on to it. I mean, there's a $5 fee on there for emergency rooms. There's a $5 fee. I mean, there's all these fees added on, and there's too many fees. So the judges just say, I'm going to waive the fees completely. I'll fine you the $120 for speeding, but I'll waive all your fees, and then there's no money getting distributed that way. But that's the way the state, our legislators wanted it set up, not the way we wanted it set up.
Have you been in contact with our representatives here in Riverside?
Yes, I wrote a letter to State Representative Mike Zaleski, and I also called him on the phone and spoke to him. He said he was supportive of getting the training funding, and he was going to speak to the governor's budget staff and make it a priority. And I gave him the Senate bill number, so he was supportive of it. But he said that there's a disconnect between Metro Chicago and Southern Illinois and Central Illinois. And my response to him, it affects East St. Louis Police Department as much as it affects Riverside. It affects everyone in Illinois. So, and I told him if he had a better idea on how to fund that, we would absolutely go along with that, whatever they wanted to do. So, but it is a very, then that's the only money you get for police training in Illinois. I told the state representative we have to address it somewhere.
Right. So. Well, for our part up here, I mean, we can certainly contact our local legislators and let them know what our support for the Senate bill, and I could also take it to the West Central Municipal Conference, and I suspect that they would want to support something like this as well, because as you just described it, it's a critical need.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Weitzel. Appreciate it. Next up are ordinances and resolutions. We have an ordinance approving an expansion of an existing special use to allow for a classroom addition to the existing school, Blythe Park Elementary at 735 Leasley Road, Riverside School District 96. Mr. Mars, where did we leave this last time? Was there a pending motion? Was a motion made to approve the ordinance at the last meeting?
Yeah, it wasn't.
Mr. Pollock, do you remember whether?
Was there a formal motion on the table? Yeah.
Let's just cover our bases before we get into discussion. I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the ordinance.
I'll make the motion.
By Mr. Gallegos.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Peters. Ms. Abt, are you going to lead us through this?
Yes, as you may recall, the school district is proposing to put a small classroom addition onto Blythe Park Elementary. It would be located on the southwest corner of the building, and since this is an existing special use, and classroom addition is considered an increase in the intensity of the use, and therefore it does require additional special use approval. So it had its public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they recommended approval of it. Additionally, since it is a local landmark, it went to the Preservation Commission for a certificate of appropriateness and received their approval. At your February 6th meeting, the ordinance was before you, and some trustees expressed some concern about the chosen building materials and the impact that using a wood composite siding rather than brick would have on the neighborhood. One of the findings of fact for a special use is that the proposed use will not cause substantial injury to the value of other properties in the neighborhood. And some trustees expressed concern about a wood composite, and as well as the need for some clear direction from the Preservation Commission regarding their approval of the certificate appropriateness and the materials. They requested that the Preservation Commission consider the impact on the neighborhood and provide a more detailed feedback on the materials and whether brick or wood siding would be more appropriate and meet the preservation standards. So at your direction, the Preservation Commission discussed the chosen materials for the addition to Blythe Park at their regular meeting on February 13th, and they provided the following comment. The Commission still supports its original certificate of appropriateness approval. The use of either siding or brick is appropriate, as both materials would meet the Department of the Interior's standard of differentiation. 3 commissioners were unable to attend the meeting due to some conflicts, so they did provide statements regarding the proposed materials and the preservation standards, and those were included in your packet. Also attached in your packet was a draft copy of the minutes from that meeting for your consideration. We did bring some samples of the materials with, if the board wanted to take a look at them, and the school district and their architect are here to answer any questions that you have.
So I was not here at the last meeting, so I'll leave it up to you to pick up where you left off.
Well, since I raised the issue initially, you know, like I opened my remarks last time, I think it's an incredible compliment to the village of Riverside that we have a need for this expansion and building out. It illustrates that the village is healthy, has a lot of young families that are using the school district, and it's just a great sign, and a great sign for the future of Riverside. My concern, you know, was the over the standard of affecting values of the surrounding properties, and noted to the board last meeting that you know, many of the homes around there were brick, and discussed on how the way that the school is set up, it's on the rise of the hill. You have this wonderful brick structure, and questioned whether that wood siding you know, was going to have some sort of negative impact, just because it seemed a little disconnected from the neighborhood around it. And I appreciate Preservation Commission adding some clarifying remarks. You know, I think the biggest remark came from Chairman Pipple, Chairman of the Riverside Preservation Commission. He said in his memorandum that was submitted as part of the minutes of last night's meeting, to clarify, there was no recommendation from the commission to use the composite material. If the district and its architects want to select brick as cladding, it would require no further review from the Preservation Commission, as this was an approved option. I rewatched the board meeting for District 96, and it appears that there was some confusion. The way I heard it, that there was some statement that the Preservation Commission either required the wood siding or was in approval of the wood siding. You know, I just want to clarify that, you know, when you look at the draft minutes, there's a number of statements from Commissioner Combs, either siding or brick meets the standard. Vice Chair Ray stated that he would have chosen brick, but that siding also met the standard. So there is some optionality here. One is not required over the other from preservation, and I'm assuming that there was no preference stated by planning and zoning?
No.
Okay. So that, I think this is a very helpful exercise, because when I think it was first presented, at least my feeling was that we were led down a path that the siding was somehow required by somebody, and that is just not the case.
I guess for clarification, the Planning and Zoning Commission only reviewed the cladding because that was the district's chosen preference, and so that was what was presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Preservation saw it first, and then it moved on to Planning and Zoning Commission. So.
But planning and zoning had no requirement that they use the wood?
They had no issue.
Okay.
Would someone from the district like to explain to us the rationale for the siding?
Good evening. My name is Ryan Kelly. I'm with DLA Architects. We're the architects of record for District 96. So there are really 4 materials that are present on Blythe Park. One is brick, the second is glass, the third is steel in the windows, and the fourth is an interior wood siding, not siding but cladding. In hearing from the Historic Commission, understanding the importance of the original design and preserving that, what we look to do is, as one of the Interior's Department of Interior standards, look to differentiate that addition while still complementing the existing architecture. We took that interior material and used that as an exterior siding. What we were looking for in the composite material is a low maintenance or no maintenance product, and something that would weather well. It is a timber veneer encapsulated in a high pressure laminate, so that means that each one is unique, each panel is unique, so it does give it that traditional wood siding look. So.
Any questions from the trustees?
I guess based on the commission's finding that either wood or the brick would be acceptable to the Preservation Commission, I guess I'm wondering why not use brick? In my experience, I don't see a lot of people in brick homes rushing out to put laminate siding to cover up their brick.
Sure. I mean, it's not a laminate, it's a different material, but the choice was when we met with Historic Preservation Commission, what they said to us that either material would be acceptable and would accomplish the goals of the Department of Interiors in differentiating the building. And so they also said that that color was not something that they wanted to comment on. There were many people there that, commissioners that liked the wood siding and thought it was a good choice and complemented the existing architecture. So it was left up to us to make that decision as to what we would present to the planning and zoning, and so that's why we presented the wood siding.
Is there a cost difference on wood versus?
No, not at this size addition. There is virtually no cost difference.
Mr. Jisa?
And with regard to the bricks, just to make it more streamlined, because I agree with Ed, when you put an addition on a house, it seems, especially in a brick community, putting a different siding on it, to me, always makes it stand out more. I
Sure.
get the mid-century modern look.
Yep.
But if there's no cost difference, would the brick, how long would it take the brick to weather to look like the brick that's connected to it?
Well, we would, if we went with a brick, we wouldn't try to match the existing. We would do something different because I think there again we're looking to differentiate, and that's again part of what the interiors requires is to differentiate that addition. So using the existing brick would really not accomplish that in our estimation.
I was at the Preservation Commission meeting. It did seem that they were really more in favor of the wood siding. They wanted it to be different in the sense that it wasn't part of the original historic part of the building. They also noted it'd be less maintenance with no tuck pointing necessary, in years to come. So it did seem that look-wise, they favored the wood siding.
That's just not reflected in the minutes. I'm very confused.
Is that?
And also my understanding is that the wood composite is similar to the style of the interior of the building, correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure if in your packet was included a shot of the interior hallway. So that was the motivation for picking this material. The color of it and the hue was to complement and match that interior.
I'm sorry, maybe I missed this in some of our materials. Do you have a picture like that with the brick option?
I do.
I mean, I know it's just a mock-up.
Yeah, we presented that. I think I have one copy that we can distribute.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm sensitive to the whole concept that you want to preserve the original building and you don't want it to look like this was part of the building, right? That's
Correct.
the whole purpose.
Correct.
So, understanding if brick actually if there is a negative to brick because it makes it look like you were trying to match the rest of the building but failed or something, you know what I mean? Like
Sure.
if there's that concern, I would be concerned about that issue. But I also understand, Trustee Hannon's point about wanting to match the rest of the vibe of the surrounding communities, the look and feel of it, so.
Sure. I guess we didn't feel that it would harm the property value, harm the neighborhood, because it did reference the original design in a different way. So, again, that was our reason for choosing the material. I think the Historic Commission, also conceded that brick could accomplish that same goal, and again, left it up to us to make that design choice.
Can you, sorry, I wasn't at the last meeting, but can you, I read through the stuff, but can you articulate why you want it to look different? From a design perspective, I don't really understand that. I'm not a designer, you are, right? But
So,
to me, it would make more sense, just based on the actual building itself, to blend it in.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hidden under that hill and stuff like that. So if I were staring at it, I'd rather not see the differentiation.
part of the Historic Commission could speak better to this than I could. The Department of Interior's. Here, why don't I
Do you mind
just
if
distribute?
Sorry. Thank you.
Part of what the Department of Interior requires of the Historic Commission and adding on to a landmark building is that it does not replicate, doesn't look like the original building, that it is different in some way. So I guess that's the short answer to your question. That's why we chose to do something that, again, complemented the original design, but did it in a different way. So it obviously is something not of the 1940s, it's something of 2020, but it complemented the original architecture and design.
So that was but historically speaking, when you guys do designs, would you ordinarily blend it, or would you ordinarily separate the design?
I think it depends. If it's a new building that's all built at the same time, yes, we could look to blend it, you know, obviously with different materials, but look as one building. If we add on to a building, you know, often there are times where it's meant to reflect a progressive educational model that's happening within the district, a new architecture. If it's a landmark, obviously there's some other considerations. But I think it would depend on the building. As an addition, I do think it is important to not replicate, that it is of the era that it's built, and still be sympathetic to the original architecture. I mean, it's a fine line, but I think that is, in my estimation, the correct way to approach it.
President Sells, if I can try to clarify.
Please.
Trustee Jisa, at the last meeting, there was a discussion that the standards that are used by the Historic Preservation Commission require a differentiation, but they still came to a conclusion that either brick or siding would meet that differentiation standard.
So there has to be a different brick.
Right. And I think the pictures show that. And the concern I raised, you know, and again, the assertion is made that there will be no negative impact on surrounding property values. I've seen no analysis in the record on that. You know, people who have been to my house know that I have a wonderful, ugly lime green tile in my kitchen, and I would think that if I were to use that on the exterior of my building, that a lot of neighbors would think I've decreased their property value. But you know, again, I just go with my statement. I'm struggling with, has this standard been met when we're putting something other than brick in an area that has predominantly brick homes?
Okay, other comments, discussion? Mr. Pollock?
We've got a recommendation from Historic Preservation. It says it doesn't matter, either one works. We don't have design standards as a village. We have an architect, licensed architect, who's making the statement that he believes that the siding is a more appropriate material based on the distinction from the brick, which I don't want to comment on my personal opinion of aesthetics, but I will anyway. I would agree with that statement. From being a design professional myself, I can see why that distinction is important. I look at the siding looks much better than this depiction.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's not the reason why I would vote the way I would. I would vote to defer to the presentation made by the architect based on Historic Preservation's comments, based on the fact that it meets all of our standards as a village. And so I really don't have a basis to say change it to brick.
And I guess my, you know, a statement in the application without any support or reports that it does not impair the value of the surrounding properties, to me, does not necessarily mean that it meets the standard. So this is not what is preferred. It is a question that is yet to be answered, is if we have a building that blends with the rest of the brick homes around that area, my proposal is that that has less chance of having an adverse effect on the values than putting something that does not blend with the rest of the brick homes. And one of the standards that has to be met is, are we jeopardizing the value of the surrounding properties? So it's I think, a slightly different analysis than you're pointing out. We do have grounds, and one of the grounds is, have all the standards been met?
I understand that perspective. We don't have architectural standards, nor have we in the past, to my knowledge, used architectural standards to determine the zoning finding of impact on property values. Without that standard, to say that that's the case, I struggle to say that we can say that the siding would have a negligible impact on surrounding property values. It's very subjective to say that. The assumption is that brick is better than wood. I guess the assumption too is that the surrounding homes are brick, and that makes sense. I get that. But you know, I struggle with that. I understand what Trustee Hannon is saying, but I just don't see the basis to require different material, and I think this does fit in well with the neighborhood.
Anything else? So you have in front of you a motion to approve an ordinance for the expansion of an existing special use to allow for a classroom addition to the existing school, Blythe Elementary at 735 Leasley Road, Riverside, School District 96. Please call the roll.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Jisa.
Aye.
Trustee Hannon.
No.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, and thank you for coming this evening to answer our questions. We appreciate it. Moving on, next up are considerations. The first item for discussion tonight is the renewal of the Flood Brothers contract. Manager Francis.
Thank you. Back in September of last year, we bought a preliminary proposal from Flood Brothers with regard to contract amendment and extension to our existing agreement for 7 years. During that time, the board provided some feedback and asked village staff to continue our discussion with Flood Brothers, and we did. This evening, Michael Flood is here to answer any questions, but I'll go through what has been provided as a proposal based on the feedback that the board provides this evening and the guidance that they provide. Then if we have consensus of the board, then we would work on a contract amendment for extension of our existing contract. Some items of note that we currently have as part of our contract that actually a lot of our neighbor communities do not have is electronic, light bulb, and battery recycling over at Public Works. A new addition to our contract for this would be the implementation of an annual household hazardous waste and shredding event, which we have received a lot of feedback from residents in the past with regard to that. And so we would look at a date where sometimes MWRD will sometimes host an annual event, or the zoo. And so we will make sure that the timing is such that there's distance between those two events, so residents essentially have two different opportunities to utilize those. Also, in the past, the village has paid for the annual pumpkin composting event. That will be included at no additional charge in our contract. We've received feedback from residents not only for backdoor trash service, but also for recycling. And that will now be included in this new contract at an additional cost, but residents were willing to pay for the additional cost. They just wanted the option to have backdoor recycling. Something that I think we're very excited about is the mixed composting and yard waste program. And so that would be at no additional cost to residents. Currently, there is a cost to residents. And so that, I think, is something very exciting. We're trying to obviously roll out those various initiatives that the board has requested. A yard waste cart rental will be included at $150 per month and no additional charge. And also another item to point out is that our rates would be frozen until 2021. And then thereafter, we would have a 2.75% increase in those future years. There would continue to be a senior citizen discount of 15%. And I'm trying to recall, included within the packet actually are comps as it relates to current garbage contracts. Please note that obviously, like I said, there are certain services that the Village of Riverside receives. The e-waste is a big one, the light bulbs, the batteries, but in addition to that, now the composting that these other communities do not currently have. So I just wanted to point that out. And as I stated, Michael Flood is here to answer any questions that the board may have.
Questions? Ms. Evans?
My first question is, what kind of batteries can we recycle? Every battery, like car batteries?
Household batteries.
Household batteries only? And what kind of light bulbs? Any light bulb?
Yes, any light bulb can be disposed of at the Public Works.
And it said yard waste cart rental. What is a yard waste cart?
So if you choose to not provide your own essential garbage can that usually is labeled with yard waste, you can rent one from Flood Brothers.
Also, last question from the residents is some of them still have old bins and they want to know how to get new bins.
I did hear about that. When you say old bins, I think that looking for clarification on our part would be when we transitioned in 2015 from the previous hauler to our carts, the Village of Riverside owns the recycling carts with the logo of Riverside on it. So I guess there's confusion. Are people talking about those carts, or did the previous hauler not remove all the carts like they were supposed to during the transition, and they still have additional carts from the previous hauler that they'd like to have swapped out or removed? Or
So can they just call Flood Brothers directly? And okay.
Yes, yeah. But that's one thing to get clarification on, is exactly which cart they'd be talking about.
Right, I don't know either.
Okay.
That was the garbage cart left over from the prior hauler.
So I believe I have the residents' contact information, and so Michael will reach out to them directly to provide that additional information. Because if they're looking to just switch out because perhaps their old Flood Brothers one needs replacement, they're happy to do so because they're already paying for the rental fee. If it's something that needs to be switched out, he'll provide them with what the rate is moving forward.
So I did have one other question from a resident regarding the Christmas trees.
Yes.
So what happens to the Christmas trees after you pick them up?
So yard waste facilities, assuming they continue to be open, they will be recycled. You battle some of the elements if they hold them till the facility can properly recycle them, or they might be disposed of.
But if possible, they're recycled.
Correct, yeah. Well, majority of the time they should be recycled because the landfills will not accept yard waste materials.
I just want to say something. I got some emails, and I just want, a lot of times when you're a vendor, you get a lot of criticism. But the experience that I've personally had, that a lot of the residents that emailed me have had, has been fantastic with you and your people, and just, all I can speak of is the person on my route. He's incredibly, both on the recycling person and the other person are incredibly professional, so you should be proud of,
Thank you.
Of your team.
We do appreciate that.
Stan?
Yeah. First of all, just want to say that the composting and the composting at no additional cost is spectacular. I think that's very helpful. A lot of the comments we've gotten have focused on how to become more eco-friendly, and this composting at no fee, I think, is a great commitment, so I wanted to thank you for that. A couple of questions I had. First of all, it's great to see that the rate we're getting is on the lower end of the scale among comparable suburbs. That's noting. You had information in here on commercial rates. Is that part of it? I just want to understand how those commercial rates compare with the commercial rates in the surrounding areas.
I can have our solid waste agency pull that data because they collect it from all the various contracts. When we did the RFP 5 years ago, it was competitive to where Flood Brothers was the low bid.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not doing anything inadvertently to make doing business in Riverside more
actually,
difficult.
a point to note has actually been Riverside Foods was the one that came to us when we were doing, because I was part of the RFP back in 2015. Peter from Riverside Foods was actually advocating for Flood Brothers and us evaluating them as a potential refuse hauler.
Good. And then just one question on the mechanics of the annual increase. It says in here that it's based off of the CPI. Is that?
So there's a revised letter in there, and it's no longer the CPI. They have committed to the 2.75 on an annual basis.
So it's going to be 2.5% increase every year after that?
Beginning in 2021.
Okay.
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Flatt. Appreciate
Thank you, guys.
So what else do you need from us on this?
I just want to confirm that there's consensus and that I will work with Attorney Mars and Flood Brothers to get a contract amendment.
Yes. I see nothing but nodding heads.
Yes.
I think very good.
Perfect, thank you.
And since you're already warmed up, next is a discussion regarding a public comment policy.
Yes. So the last time, just to give a little bit of background and history, the board previously adopted in April of 2007 guidelines for village board meeting participation. These guidelines were subsequently revised in June of 2009. The current ones that are provided are actually quite dated, as they're almost 11 years old at this point in time, and they don't necessarily incorporate process as it relates to committees, subcommittees, commissions. So in working with Attorney Mars to provide some feedback as it relates to what other communities have for public comment policy, we essentially took what we previously had and elaborated on it based on current laws and what other communities are doing as part of their public comment policy. And so this item is just for discussion only to provide myself and Attorney Mars guidance so that we can bring something back to the village board for final board action.
So you have the proposed policy in front of you. Do you have any thoughts, criticisms, questions? Are you happy with the way it looks?
I have some thoughts.
Please.
On a couple of them. So in the first one, it says that individuals wishing to speak during public comment must sign in, and then the speakers will be called in order. So we don't do that, and I think it works fine. And also, I think that some people might decide mid-meeting that they want to respond to something, and so I still think we should give them a chance to talk. So I was wondering if we could just strike that.
Yeah, what's the point of having them sign in?
It's pretty common practice where you have a lot of kind of regular speakers at a public comment. It just provides some kind of order to the whole thing. The clerk can call out the people in order, and especially if you get into a situation where you have a ton of people that you know, a lot of the intent of all these is just when the big issue comes along and you've got a big crowd, to try to provide some structure to the whole thing. You certainly don't have to do it. It's not a big deal not to, if you feel like it's working well otherwise. You could also say that, you know, we encourage people to sign up prior to that, but, you know, you're allowed to sign up at or during the meeting as well. It also gives the names of everybody for the clerk to put into the minutes and spellings and that sort of thing.
I mean, that part I get, you know, is, you know, in terms of the minute taking. But, you know, in my experience, even when we've had, you know, a large number of people that wanted to comment on something, they pretty much handle it themselves. They're very orderly and they come up, you know, one after another. We've never had a situation where the village clerk has actually called speakers to the podium.
Sure.
So I tend to agree with Trustee Evans. I personally would take that part out. What does everybody else think? The signing in part.
Yeah, I mean, I think the signing in thing is tough for sure, because you're going to have people that are going to want to say something after they hear things that are said. Maybe what you do is you give people the opportunity to speak first if they sign in. But then the question is going to come in: can you sign in online? Can you sign? I mean, you know, you could open up the floodgates.
Yeah, I just think it's like
might be a little crazy.
If I may, I think just having, whether it's even after the fact, because there are scenarios where the village clerk and I are trying to locate the correct spelling of someone's name to make sure that the minutes accurately reflect the individual that was speaking.
Well, we can handle that. We can just ask people to identify themselves and spell their name for us. Okay. Basically that, right?
One thing that I was, when I was reading through them, I actually didn't think the 2009s were that bad, to be honest with you. But the one thing that concerned me was where if you have people that are up there speaking about a topic, we're limiting it to 3 people.
Oh, wait, before we move on, can we wrap this one up first, though? Or so does everybody wants to get rid of the signing in part? Okay.
Yes.
And let's let Trustee Evans finish her points first.
That's on my list too, but I wanted to talk about number 3. It says the time allotted for the general public comment period will be 30 minutes unless a majority of the public body votes to extend the discussion. And I just think we should make time for everyone, especially if we're going to put a 5-minute cap on.
You think we should do what?
We should just make time for everyone. 30 minutes wouldn't have been enough time the last time we had a controversial topic here. I really don't. I just think it's a little bit. It's just.
Well, remember that. I'm sorry. Okay. That's on the general public comment, like the non-agenda items. So if you were speaking on an agenda item, that wouldn't apply.
Oh, it's only something that's not on the agenda.
Just for people, coming to speak at the, about a certain event and that sort of thing. The part you do at the very beginning. But again, if I'm just providing these as kind of a template, and you guys, if you're not good with the 30 minutes, that's fine.
Well, I mean, we don't really need to listen to 2 hours of off-topic comment. So I guess that would be fair, 30 minutes.
We can ask them to move their comments to the correct topic if it is related to a topic. Have the discussion at that specific topic.
Yeah. Are we still on that point?
Yeah, still on that point. My concern is I understand the desire to allow the public participation, and that we should, and we have to, we do. And it rarely comes up where it's an issue, but
can you speak up just a little bit, please?
I'm sorry. I understand the issue of public participation, trying to encourage people to participate. But we also have to keep in mind that we have business to take care of. And we can't be here till midnight or 3 a.m. for meetings. That's never happened. But I think there needs to be some discretion on the part of the chairperson to move. If someone here is talking about a subject that's not on the agenda, I think they need to be limited. And if we need to make sure we have time to conduct the public business and not just spend the whole evening talking about off-subject matters. So I'm fine with that limit. In fact, and I'd add that at the discretion of the chair, that could be less.
I also think the distinction would need to be made in that number because it doesn't say, it just says general public comment. I mean, I think that could be related to an agenda item or no agenda, not something on the agenda. You have to be a little specific too about.
Mr. Morris.
So at the outset of number 2, it says the general public comment portion of the meeting is intended to provide an opportunity for individuals to comment on items relevant to village business. And it has kind of a list there. And then when you get down to 4, it talks about there's also going to be public comment on specific agenda items. So that's how they're distinguished.
So my feeling about this, I have misgivings about this whole concept, to be quite honest. A better way of doing it, I think, instead of saying that we're going to limit residents to 5 minutes per person and they're going to limit the public comment period to 30 minutes, would be just to provide more discretion to the chair. So if somebody, and I've only seen this happen maybe once or twice in the 14 years now that I've been doing this. If somebody is abusing the process, if they're using public comment in a way that is not in the public interest, and just going on and on and on and on, it seems to me that the chair would have the authority to say, we need you to wrap up your comments. You need to, let's get to the point. We have other business to consider. But to quantify it in generally, to the 5 minutes and to the 30 minutes, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. I remember many years ago asking a magazine about their editorial policy on word count, and they said, you can use as many words as you want, but not another word more. And that's kind of how I feel about public comment. We should allow residents to tell us what they had to say. And if it takes them 10 minutes to say it, then it should take them 10 minutes to say it without, having to get permission. And, with all due respect to Trustee Pollock's point, that's why we're here. And if it takes until 2 o'clock in the morning to hear what our residents had to say, then it's going to take until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Just to sort of comment on that, President Sells, I sort of shared that same concern. I don't want to do anything to curtail or discourage public comment, but I think Attorney Mars's clarification really changed my view that this is the public comment section. And I like the idea of limiting that to 30 minutes. And again, if they want something on the agenda, there's a process for that. And this 30-minute or 5-minute limitation doesn't apply for agenda topics.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
And I think when we had our more popular meetings, it goes to number 4, 5 minutes unless the time is extended by the presiding officer. And that's the standard, President Sells, that you used. You had, when they were talking on an agenda topic, you're like, great, you're being repetitive of the 5 others. Is there anything you'd like to add? And move them along. I think we do need objective standards for the non-agenda items comments. We don't want to ever be accused of cutting somebody off and then be accused that we're just cutting them off because their position is unpopular. I think having an objective standard gives us something to say, okay, you have 5 minutes. And then at the end of 5 minutes, thank you very much. And it's not based on what you're saying, it's based on our policy. And I think that gives us a lot of protection.
So then with regard to someone commenting on an agenda item, that limitation would not?
No, it would go to item number 4, 5 minutes unless the time is extended by the presiding officer.
Well, that also is in number 3. I mean, it can be extended by the.
And
by
I
the
think
officer.
Attorney Myers, I'm sorry to
But
interrupt.
with regard to the 30 minutes, that would have to be board action, is the way it's written now. Right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I was going to say, I think I agree with President Sells with regard to the discretion, because when you look back at some of the things that we're supposed to be doing now, we're not necessarily doing all of them, and no one's going to hit a timer, and you're not going to turn over an hourglass and wait until it's 5 minutes to kick someone off the podium. I just think that giving the president the discretion to call a comment, that's the right way to do it. It just keeps it a little bit more fluid, and it invites people to come in here. Not many people come in here anyway, so it's, and I feel like we talk a lot about transparency, and giving people the opportunity to come in here and be transparent is important. And then just to note to what Trustee Pollock had mentioned, we'd probably, if this does go through, we'd want to remove the comment then relevant to village business, because I agree with you, we've got to focus on village business. But it does mention that specifically in that number 2 in the first line, in my sense going. I think putting a timer on people can be misinterpreted unnecessarily. And I also think that it's kind of a turn off. It turns people away. It feels a little bit dirty.
Yeah. It feels harsh. Also, if we do cap it at 30 minutes, 5 minutes each, that's 6 people, and that's it. I did the math. So what if there's 7 people, you know?
Well, I guess the answer that goes back to Attorney Mars's point, though, is usually in the past when, in fact, I think without exception, when we've had controversial issues where we've had a lot of people show up to talk about something, it is an agenda item. And, you know, all they have to do is wait until you get to the agenda item.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can talk as many and as, you know, basically as long as they want. I mean, I didn't really get the distinction until Attorney Mars explained it. You know, I get the idea now that what we're trying to do is have that part of the agenda kind of set apart for public comment that is not agenda related. And so I can see the 30-minute part. I still don't like the putting a time clock on a resident.
No.
So that's the only thing that I would.
Yes, actually, if you look back to 2009, there is a time clock on it, but we don't necessarily follow it, right? So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't like it either.
I think it's going to depend for me on what the specific agenda item restrictions are. Because if we are going to hold them to this, you know, 3 or more individuals on the same topic, that seems to me to be limiting. Mm-hmm. But if we're allowing anyone to speak during that time, even if someone else has come up and said kind of a slightly different version with the new words, I feel like that has allowed a space for them to have that conversation, and I would be fine then with saying that the general comment time be kind of, like you said, set apart and have more structure to it, which is like, this is just what we do, 30 minutes, but if you want to talk about something, put it on the agenda, or if it's on the agenda, talk about it all you want when it comes to that point. It's better for us to have that discussion occur at the topic time as opposed to the general comment time, and then 45 minutes later we're coming back to it and trying to remember, okay, like, where were we on that discussion? It's just better to funnel it to that time. So I would be more in favor of the 30-minute limit or some sort of objective limit, but then expanding a little bit more of the opportunities for people to speak at the specific topic time.
I think we need some more discretion, I agree. Maybe some guidelines that say, generally speaking, people should be able to limit their comments to 5 minutes, but that if they have more to say, that's fine, and they leave it up to the, because it depends on the meeting, right? It depends on what's on the agenda. But I will double down on my 2 a.m. comment. To paraphrase what I tell my children about midnight, no good board decisions are made after 10 p.m.
ask a question? You said you canvassed other villages for their, policies. Was this policy of, a more objective general public time requirement or limitations? Was that something that was seen in those other ones?
Right, this is based on a template that when boards want public comment policies, this is kind of the basic structure that we give them. And I understand that you guys don't regularly have people hijacking your meetings, but there are clients where we're at meetings that general public comment routinely exceeds an hour. The clerk is timing each person and cutting them off because they will routinely go on for.
So you're saying we're lucky.
You guys are lucky, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate all the other things you're saying. I would just want to make sure we have some kind of structure to address these things, and if you want to build more flexibility into it, that's absolutely no problem. And your last point, a couple of you have brought up this 3 or more individuals speaking on the same topic. That is phrased as are requested to designate a single spokesperson. So that's something that when you get a big group and you're talking about a controversial subject, we're encouraging people to designate a spokesperson so we don't have 10 people in a row saying the exact same thing.
Could we add a sentence, I think that's number 8 then, that says there is no requirement that
Yeah, if people want their say, we're not going to
exactly, because I could see that dissuading people, that first sentence dissuading. So a second sentence that says something about, while it's requested and encouraged, there's no requirement that you.
I was just going to ask to change requested to encouraged.
Sure.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Well, since we're talking at that point, I would get rid of that altogether.
So, yeah.
Because
Okay, that's fine with me too.
my experience is that I might hear it as being repetitive, but the person saying it cares about their voice. So even if the person prior to them has said something that to our ears sounds remarkably similar, to them it's their voice, it's their opinion, and it just has a bad feel to it to me. I don't see the point of.
So how about number 9 too?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if it is actually repetitive, you could prevent it using 9. So.
Right,
And some of us-
and we've done that before. We've said we've had a lot of people talking. If you have something new that you'd like to add, that can be handled by the chair. To put it into a policy like this, I think sends the wrong message to our residents.
Yeah, I agree. On agenda items, I think we want to do all we can to encourage public comment and give the presiding officer the discretion they need to move the meeting along. But I don't think we want to do anything that could be interpreted to curtail someone coming up and voicing their concerns or their encouragement on an agenda item.
So to summarize then, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, so I think I hear consensus that in number 3, we're going to take out the 5-minute, is it number 3? Yeah, the number 3, we're going to take out the 5-minute rule, but we're going to leave the 30-minute rule. Is that correct?
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And then we're going to get rid of number 8. Is that correct?
And number 9.
Well, number 9.
No, I want to keep number 9.
Number 9 we should keep. Is that?
Some of us like to quantify feedback, especially I've noticed in the last couple boards that I've watched here. I like to quantify feedback, so if more than one person has the same opinion, I think a lot of us might be interested in hearing it, especially if their opinion's the same as ours.
Yeah, so I think you're right, Mr. Jisa, so then we need to get rid of number 9 as well.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, because I agree. I mean, a lot of times it's the power of numbers.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter if we're hearing the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
That's part of the power of the experience is we're hearing the same thing over and over.
So we're deleting it?
I mean, that's.
Yeah, we'll delete number 9.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, because like from personal experience, that's what flipped me on the whole video corporate thing. I mean, it was just so many people kept coming up and emailing, and I was like, all right, cool.
I mean, I guess we still know that the chair has discretion to say that the meeting needs to move along. If someone literally is standing up there just repeating their same opinion 3 or 4 times, or having someone else repeat it 3 or 4 times. I'm trying to address what I think is your concern of just hearing the same comments, but also know that each person's voice is unique and important, regardless of the message is the same. So I agree with getting rid of 9, that's what I was trying to suggest earlier, but is this in here, I guess I need to look, is there still discretion for the chair in his judgment to move things along if need be?
Yeah, I do remember a different chairperson saying, if you have something new to say tonight, please go ahead and say it. If it's something you've already heard, I don't want to limit what you're saying, but
Isn't that inherent?
that was a different chairperson.
But isn't that inherent in the power of the chair?
That's what I'm asking you.
Well, what if I soften 9 up a little bit?
And how would you do that? Yeah,
I mean, yes, it is inherent, but kind of the purpose of the rules is to telegraph to the public who don't understand. If you have something to point to that talks about, after 3 hours of public comment, we can limit repetition. That's
The
helpful.
chair has the authority to do that. Maybe
Right.
just an express statement of the inherent
Like, it's an
authority.
option.
Right, I understand that you don't like how it's worded, but if I could bring back a version that's a little.
Or maybe just a sentence that specifically says about the power of the chair to, for an expeditious and efficient meeting and,
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so Mr. Mars will work on that one. Did you have anything else?
Yeah, one last thing. I was just wondering if we could get some more consistency in the language where it refers to members or members of the public body. So I think maybe, or majority of the members present, maybe just present members of the public body.
Where are you at, Ms. Evans?
13?
I'm just looking generally through the whole document.
Oh,
They're
okay.
just sort of, it's
Can
not
you-
specific about who's,
Can you provide that to Mr. Mars separately, and then he can fix it? Did you have something other than you got that? Okay. Anything else from anyone? Okay. Is that what you need?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we don't have any, I assume we don't have any new business, is that right? There's no new business. We have no need for an executive session, so I'd ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
By Mr. Gallagher.
Second.
By Ms. Peters, please call the roll.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Gallagher.
Aye.
Trustee Jisa. Trustee Hannon.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good night.
Listen to your right, good.